Nobody saw this coming. What was supposed to be one of the most straightforward quarterback battles in the league has suddenly turned into something far more complicated and far more intense. For weeks, the entire conversation around the Cleveland Browns revolved around two names. On one side, you had Deshaun Watson, the veteran expected to hold his ground and reassert control. On the other, Shedeur Sanders, the rising star, walking in with confidence, attention, and a wave of momentum that made people believe he could shake things up faster than expected. It felt like a clean storyline: experience versus upside, stability versus potential. Most people thought the only question was how long it would take before one clearly separated from the other. But that version of the story is already breaking down, because behind the scenes, a different narrative has been building, and now it's starting to surface. Dillon Gabriel has entered this competition in a way that nobody can ignore anymore. What once looked like a quiet depth addition is suddenly turning into one of the most talked about elements of this entire situation. There's growing buzz, and it's not subtle. Reports suggest frustration has been building, that Gabriel may feel overlooked, and that the so-called open competition being presented publicly might not feel as open from the inside. And when a quarterback, especially one who believes he should be competing for a starting role, starts feeling like the opportunity isn't real, that tension doesn't just stay contained, it spreads. That's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because in the NFL, teams love to use one phrase more than anything else: open competition. You hear it every offseason, every training camp, every time a position looks even slightly uncertain. Coaches say all the right things. They talk about fairness, about earning reps, about the best player winning the job. On the surface, it sounds exactly how fans expect it to work. But inside the building, players usually know the truth long before the public does. They can feel it in how reps are distributed, in which throws get more attention, and how coaches respond to mistakes. And right now, around the Cleveland Browns, there's growing chatter that this competition might not be as even as it sounds. That's where the tension begins, because reports and speculation suggest that Dillon Gabriel may already believe the scales are tilted. Not officially, not in a way anyone will say out loud, but in the subtle ways that matter most to players. Fewer meaningful reps, less spotlight during key moments, more attention naturally flowing towards Shedeur Sanders and the established presence of Deshaun Watson. When that pattern starts forming early, it creates a dangerous perception that the outcome might already be leaning in a certain direction before the real battle even begins. And once a quarterback starts thinking that way, every small detail feels bigger than it actually is. The problem with a fake competition, or even the perception of one, is that it doesn't stay isolated to a single player. Teammates notice. They watch who gets the critical reps when practice tightens up. They see who coaches spend more time correcting versus who they quietly trust. And even if nobody says it publicly, those observations start shaping opinions inside the locker room. If one player feels like he's competing uphill while others seem to have a clearer path, it introduces doubt, not just in the competition, but in the process itself. And once trust in that process starts slipping, it becomes incredibly hard to control the narrative.
For a quarterback, that feeling hits even harder. This isn't a position where you can afford to think you're second in line before the decision is made. Confidence drives everything: timing, decision-making, leadership. If that confidence gets replaced with hesitation or frustration, it shows up immediately on the field. And that's why the situation becomes so volatile. Because now, instead of three quarterbacks simply competing, you potentially have one questioning the system, one carrying expectations, and one gaining momentum. That's not balance, that's friction. And once that friction starts building, it doesn't take much to push it into something bigger. That friction is exactly where things start to boil over, because when a quarterback feels like he's being pushed to the side, he doesn't just accept it quietly, he reacts. And right now, all the noise seems to be pointing in one direction. Reports and speculation suggest that Dillon Gabriel isn't just noticing the imbalance, he's feeling it, and it's starting to wear on him. This isn't a player who came in expecting to sit back and observe. He came in believing he had a real shot, a real opportunity to compete and possibly win the job. So when the reality starts to feel different from the promise, frustration isn't just natural, it's inevitable. What makes this more intense is how quarterbacks are wired. At that position, belief isn't optional, it's everything. You don't reach this level by thinking you're a backup. You get there by walking into every room convinced you can be the guy, the leader, the difference maker. So when that mindset collides with a situation that feels predetermined, it creates internal pressure that's hard to ignore. And according to what's being said, Gabriel may be reaching that point where the frustration is no longer just internal. It's starting to show in his energy, in his urgency, maybe even in how he approaches every single rep. There's also a bigger layer to this. Rumors suggest he feels like he's fighting for visibility just as much as he's fighting for the job itself. While the spotlight naturally follows Shedeur Sanders and the expectations remain tied to Deshaun Watson, Gabriel may feel like he's being asked to prove himself without ever being fully seen. That's a tough position for any competitor, especially at quarterback, where perception can shape opportunity just as much as performance. If a player believes he's not getting a fair platform to showcase what he can do, their response is usually one of two things. Either he rises with intensity or he starts pressing. And that's where the situation becomes dangerous, because pressing doesn't always look like effort. It often looks like mistakes, a forced throw here, an overreaction there, trying to do too much in limited chances. Coaches notice that immediately. What starts as frustration can quickly be interpreted as instability, and in a quarterback competition, stability is everything. If Gabriel is trying to send a message that he deserves respect in a real shot, the way that message comes across could determine how decision-makers view him behind the scenes. At the same time, that fire can't be completely dismissed. A hungry quarterback can elevate an entire room. If that frustration turns into focus, into sharper execution, into undeniable production, it can force coaches to reconsider everything. It can shift narratives. It can make a decided situation suddenly feel wide open again. But that window is small, and it doesn't stay open for long. Because while one player is fighting to be seen, someone else is quietly taking advantage of the moment. And that's exactly what's happening next. While frustration starts to build on one side of the room, something very different is happening on the other, and that contrast is impossible to ignore. Shedeur Sanders isn't reacting to the noise, he isn't feeding into the tension, and he's definitely not trying to force his way into the spotlight. Instead, he's doing something far more dangerous in a situation like this. He's staying completely steady. No emotional swings, no public frustration, no urgency that feels out of control. And in a quarterback competition that's starting to feel chaotic, that kind of calm presence stands out more than anything else. What makes this even more powerful is how naturally the attention comes to him anyway. He doesn't have to demand reps louder than everyone else or make statements to prove he belongs. The spotlight already follows him whether he asks for it or not. Every throw gets noticed, every decision gets discussed. And when a player can operate under that kind of constant attention without showing cracks, it sends a message to coaches and teammates that goes beyond raw talent. It says he can handle pressure, the kind that doesn't go away once the season starts.
There's also a psychological edge forming here, and it's subtle but real. When one quarterback appears frustrated and another looks like he's carrying the weight of expectations, the player who stays composed often ends up looking like the safest option. Coaches may never say it publicly, but stability at the quarterback position is one of the most valuable traits a player can have. Not just the ability to make throws, but the ability to control the moment. And right now, Shedeur seems to understand that better than anyone else in that room. It's also about timing. He's not trying to win the job with one big moment. He's stacking small, consistent wins, clean reads, smart decisions, controlled execution. That kind of approach builds trust slowly, but once it's there, it becomes incredibly hard to ignore. Teammates start noticing who keeps things smooth when pressure rises. Coaches start trusting the player who doesn't create extra problems they have to manage, and over time, those small details begin to outweigh everything else. And here's the part that makes it even more impactful. He's benefiting from everything happening around him without needing to be part of the chaos. The more tension builds elsewhere, the more his calm approach stands out. The more others press, the more his patience looks like control. It's the kind of dynamic that quietly shifts momentum without anyone needing to announce it. Because in a situation where everyone is fighting for attention, the player who doesn't have to fight for it at all is often the one already pulling ahead. That quiet momentum building around Shedeur Sanders is exactly what makes this situation so uncomfortable for Deshaun Watson, because now he's no longer dealing with a simple challenge. He's surrounded by pressure coming from every direction at once. As the veteran, he's expected to be the stabilizer, the one who walks into camp with control and leaves no doubt about who leads the offense. That's the standard for experienced quarterbacks in the NFL. But this situation doesn't feel stable anymore. It feels crowded, loud, and unpredictable. And when a veteran quarterback loses that sense of control even slightly, everything starts to feel heavier. What makes it even tougher is the type of competition he's facing. This isn't just one young player trying to develop behind him. It's two completely different threats pulling attention in different ways. On one side, you have a confident competitor in Dillon Gabriel, reportedly pushing for respect and trying to prove he belongs in the conversation. On the other, you have Shedeur, who isn't forcing anything, but is steadily building belief through consistency and composure. That combination creates a unique kind of pressure. Watson isn't just defending his position, he's being evaluated against two completely different narratives at the same time. And in today's NFL, that evaluation doesn't happen quietly. Every practice throw gets dissected, every off day gets amplified. Fans start comparing body language, decision-making, even confidence levels. If Watson has a solid day, it's expected. If he has an average one, it becomes a question. Meanwhile, any flash from a younger quarterback feels like momentum shifting. That's the reality of being the veteran in a room where people are already looking for the future. The margin for error shrinks fast, and the expectations don't move with it. There's also the leadership factor, which might be the most important part of all this. Veterans aren't just judged on performance, they're judged on how they control the environment. Can they keep the locker room steady when competition heats up? Can they command the huddle when doubt starts creeping in? Can they silence the noise without needing to respond to it directly? Those are the invisible tests happening right now, and they matter as much as anything happening on the field. Because if the room starts feeling uncertain, it doesn't matter what the depth chart says. Confidence can shift elsewhere. And that's where this situation becomes even more difficult. Watson isn't just playing to win a job, he's playing to stop momentum from building against him. If he dominates, the conversation ends quickly. But if he doesn't clearly separate himself, the noise only gets louder. The comparisons grow stronger, the pressure multiplies, and suddenly what once felt like his position to lose starts feeling like something he has to constantly defend. Because in a quarterback battle like this, standing still isn't enough. And this is where everything starts to shift in a way that no depth chart can control: momentum. Because in situations like this, momentum doesn't just influence decisions, it creates them. Inside the Cleveland Browns building, there's growing speculation that the energy is no longer neutral. It's moving, slowly at first, almost unnoticeable, but now it's becoming harder to ignore. And once momentum begins leaning towards one player, it changes how everything is viewed. From practice reps to locker room conversations to how coaches interpret performance. And what makes momentum so powerful is that it doesn't need permission. It builds through small moments. One sharp throw, one confident read, one composed response under pressure. Then it stacks. Teammates start reacting differently. Coaches start paying closer attention. Even the tone of media coverage begins to shift. Suddenly, the same performance that once felt routine starts carrying more weight simply because of who is doing it. And right now, there's a growing sense, based on reports, buzz, and observation, that Shedeur Sanders is quietly becoming the center of that shift.
That's what makes this dangerous for everyone else in the room. Because momentum doesn't just lift one player, it creates urgency for the others. Deshaun Watson now isn't just trying to perform well, he's trying to stop something from building against him. And Dillon Gabriel may be feeling the pressure from a different angle, like time is slipping away before he's even been given a full chance to change the narrative. When momentum starts picking a direction, it forces decisions faster than teams expect.
What once felt like a long competition suddenly feels like a race that's already halfway finished. There's also a psychological layer that makes this even more intense. Players can feel momentum before it's ever announced. They hear it in how teammates talk, they see it in who gets subtle encouragements, and they sense it in which moments feel bigger during practice. It's not always loud, but it's real. And if the locker room starts leaning even slightly toward one quarterback, that belief can accelerate everything. Coaches might still preach patience publicly, but internally, they're always aware of where the energy is moving. And once momentum reaches that point, it becomes incredibly difficult to reverse. Because now it's not just about proving you're good, it's about proving you can stop something that's already in motion. That's a much harder task. It requires more than solid performance. It requires dominance, clarity, and control. Without that, momentum keeps building in the same direction, gaining strength with every rep, every reaction, every day. And the deeper this goes, the more it starts to affect decisions that were never supposed to be rushed. Because when momentum takes over, patience disappears. And this is where the situation starts to cross a line from competition into something much harder to control. Because there's a point in every quarterback battle where pressure stops being motivating and starts becoming dangerous. The Cleveland Browns may be getting close to that moment right now, when emotions build, when narratives start forming, and when players begin feeling like time is running out, the entire dynamic changes. It's no longer just about earning a role, it becomes about forcing one. And that's where things can begin to unravel. For Dillon Gabriel, this could be the most critical phase of the entire battle. Reports and speculation suggest that frustration has been building, but frustration alone doesn't decide outcomes. How a player responds to it does. This is the stage where competitors either sharpen their focus or start pressing beyond control. And for quarterbacks, pressing rarely looks productive. It shows up in forced decisions, rushed reads, trying to make something happen on every single snap instead of letting the game come naturally. What begins as urgency can quickly be interpreted by coaches as instability, and in a position built on trust, that perception can be costly. At the same time, this pressure doesn't exist in isolation. Every reaction gets noticed. Coaches are watching more than just completions and mechanics. They're watching body language after mistakes, reactions to limited reps, and how a player carries himself when things don't go his way. Teammates are doing the same. They can feel when someone is playing freely versus when someone is playing tight. And once that difference becomes visible, it shapes how the entire room responds. A quarterback who looks like he's forcing the moment doesn't just affect his own chances, he changes how others view the stability of the position. And that's what makes this breaking point so risky, because if frustration turns into visible tension, it can create a ripple effect that goes far beyond one player. Sideline interactions get overanalyzed, rotations in practice start feeling like statements, and even small decisions begin carrying bigger meaning than they should. What once was a controlled competition becomes something closer to a daily storyline, where every action feeds the narrative instead of settling it. Meanwhile, the contrast inside the room only becomes sharper. While one player may be pushing harder to change the outcome, another, Shedeur Sanders, continues operating without that visible strain. That difference doesn't just stand out, it influences decisions. Coaches gravitate toward the player who looks in control, especially when everything around them feels uncertain. Because at the end of the day, the quarterback isn't just responsible for execution, he's responsible for the emotional tone of the entire offense. And once a competition reaches this point, it rarely goes back to neutral. And this is where the entire situation starts to tilt in a way that doesn't need an official announcement. Because sometimes a quarterback doesn't win the job in a single moment, he wins it quietly, over time, before anyone is ready to admit it. That's the feeling starting to build around Shedeur Sanders. While everything else in the room feels loud, pressure, frustration, and expectations, he's doing the one thing that consistently separates players in these situations. He's staying in control.
No forcing throws, no chasing headlines, no emotional reactions, just steady reps, clean execution, and a presence that doesn't fluctuate when the environment gets tense. And what makes this even more powerful is how that approach translates to the people who matter most. Coaches aren't just evaluating talent, they're evaluating trust. They're asking themselves which quarterback makes their job easier, which one keeps the offense on schedule, and which one can handle the weight of the position when things go wrong. And when one player consistently shows poise while others are dealing with different kinds of pressure, that answer starts becoming clearer. It's not always about who flashes the most, it's about who settles everything around them. And right now, there's a growing sense that Shedeur is doing exactly that.
Then there's the locker room factor, which often decides more than people realize. Teammates pay attention to details the public never sees. Receivers notice who delivers the most catchable ball. Linemen notice who commands the huddle with confidence. Even defensive players can tell which quarterback feels hardest to prepare for in practice. If those small impressions begin leaning toward one player, it creates internal belief. And once that belief forms, it spreads fast. A quarterback doesn't just need to win coaches over, he needs to win the room. And based on how momentum has been shifting, there's a real possibility that Shedeur is starting to do both. There's also the bigger picture that organizations can't ignore. Energy matters, direction matters. If a young quarterback is not only performing but also bringing a sense of excitement and clarity to the team's future, that carries weight in decision-making. It doesn't guarantee anything on its own, but when it aligns with performance and composure, it becomes hard to overlook. And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because while Deshaun Watson is trying to hold his position and Dillon Gabriel may be pushing to change the narrative, Shedeur is simply building his case without resistance. And that's often how these battles are decided, not by who argues the loudest or pushes the hardest, but by who makes the outcome feel obvious. And now it all comes down to a decision the Cleveland Browns can't avoid much longer. What started as a routine quarterback competition is turned into something far more serious, a choice that could define not just Week 1, but the entire franchise. Because this isn't simply about picking a starter, it's about deciding what identity this team wants to carry forward. Do they stay committed to experience and stability with Deshaun Watson, hoping he reclaims full control and silences the noise? Do they try to rebalance the situation and give Dillon Gabriel the opportunity he reportedly believes he deserves? Or do they lean into what's happening right in front of them and trust the momentum building around Shedeur? Because the truth is, each path comes with its own risk. Staying with the veteran might offer familiarity, but it also means carrying the weight of expectation and scrutiny that hasn't gone away. Reopening the competition to satisfy frustration could create short-term balance, but it risks extending tension that's already growing. And turning to a young quarterback, even one showing composure and promise, means embracing change before everyone is fully comfortable with it. None of these options are simple, but avoiding the decision isn't one of them. What makes this moment so critical is how clearly the signals are starting to form. Watson is trying to protect his position under increasing pressure. Gabriel is trying to force his way into a conversation that may already be shifting away from him. In Shedeur, he's not forcing anything at all. He's letting performance, presence, and consistency speak for him. In situations like this, that difference matters more than people think. Because when one player is chasing the moment and another is controlling it, coaches notice, and so does the locker room. And that's really what this comes down to. Not just talent, not just reps, not just headlines, but belief. Who does the team believe in when the game is on the line? Who makes the offense feel steady when everything else gets loud? Who gives the franchise a sense of direction instead of uncertainty? Those are the questions being answered right now, even if nobody has said it out loud yet. Because once a team starts feeling like the future is already in the building, it becomes harder to justify waiting. So now the question isn't whether this competition is real, it's whether the answer is already becoming obvious.